Hello learners, welcome to lesson 5 of week 1. We discussed some parts of literature in the previous lesson. We were introduced to the Romantic period and the Victorian era also. Let's look at the post-World War II time. We know that the World War, the First World War and the Second World War, they had a tremendous impact on literature. As we already know, literature consists of the values, the emotions, and the experiences of a generation of people. And both the world wars cost many lives, cost many upheavals, and if there were human losses, and when there were wars, and when there were bombs that were used, they caused misery all around the world. And when human beings were affected, it was all reflected in the literature. One cannot forget the Depression years in America and how those years gave rise to the sense of isolation in the literature of the time. And another important thing was, after the devastation of the wars, after the loss of human lives, there was an early awareness, an awakening to the environmental losses. Technology had improved so much that it was humans killing humans, and it was obviously the environment also that took a hit. So from post-World War years to the late 20th century is the time when there was environmental awareness, and there was a rise of environmental movements, and there came ecological themes in the writings, and the key figures were Rachel Carson. Her non-fiction is important. Ursula K. Le Guin, known for her science fiction, and Gary Snyder for the poetry. So we can see that there are different genres over here, and they were all related to the environment. For example, Carson's Silent Spring raised awareness about the environmental impact of pesticides. And along with pesticides, we know there was a need for medicines, there was a need for vaccines, and when the wars were going on, there was a need for rubber, and all these things and these needs mixed together with imperialism, they created all sorts of hazards in the environment. When we come to the 21st century literature, climate change became a central theme. There was an increasingly urgent focus on climate change, environmental degradation, and sustainability. Eco-fiction and climate fiction, also known as cli-fi, genres addressed climate change and environmental issues. And it's quite interesting. Climate fiction, eco-fiction, and science fiction, they constantly overlapped. So what was around the 60s, what was supposed to be science fiction and had a lot in it related to environment, gradually diversified into another field, and that was cli-fi. From sci-fi, we go to cli-fi. So the key figures as far as fiction was concerned was Margaret Atwood and Amitav Ghosh, Kim Stanley Robinson, and Barbara Kingsolver. These writers used fiction as a mode to convey various aspects of environmental damage caused by climate change. Atwood's Mad Adam trilogy explores dystopian futures impacted by climate change. So here you can see how science fiction and climate fiction seem to come together. There is a dystopian future of imagined worlds, of imagined semi-human figures, and then there's the impact of climate change. Future developments. Emerging themes. Some of the emerging themes were intersectionality, exploring climate change through the lenses of race, gender, and socioeconomic status. Speculative futures, imagining both utopian and dystopian futures shaped by climate change and human responses. Narratives of resilience, stories focusing on adaptation, survival, and innovative solutions to environmental crisis. So here there were various ways of dealing with situations in the environment. Some writers took up forests, some writers took up other living beings such as animals and birds. There were some writers who focused on sea life, yet others focused on life in the hills. So there was a lot of variety if we talk about the different kinds of literature based on environment. And when it called out for a warning about climate change, then it was climate literature. There is a difference between nature writing, between eco literature, and between cli-fi. Nature writing is straight nature writing, what we see during the Romantic period, the appreciation of nature, the appraisal of nature, evaluation of its importance. So it is rather descriptive and appreciative. But the other one is the eco literature, that is talking about the destruction of environment and how there are losses in the land and the mountains and the seas. But climate fiction is different. It talks about losses through changes in climate. There's a difference between the three, and here it is about various species, various living creatures on the earth, whether it's plants or whether it's trees, and their destruction. So in this way, though there is an overlap and it's all about nature, all three of them, climate fiction is the latest and the most recent, and it deals about the changes in climate and how they impact human and non-human life on the planet. Along with that, there have been a lot of experiments, a lot of innovation in literature going in the direction of climate. So there are many new literary forms and media. Digital and interactive literature, it means there is a use of digital platforms and interactive media to engage readers with climate change narratives. There are collaborative projects in which writers collaborate with scientists, activists, and artists to create interdisciplinary works. So interdisciplinarity is something that belongs to the 21st century. Ever since the idea of comparative literature came up in the late 20th century, the idea is to bring in literatures from the world and study them and compare them. And here is the idea of this collaboration between climate science and various other subjects, climate science and literature. So there is a comparative perspective, and it started also late in the 20th century, and it talks about collaboration. So climate and earth and the values and the beliefs and the traditions, the customs of tribal people, all these things came out into the open and were used by climate fiction writers. Educational integration. Climate education in literature means that literature is used to raise awareness and inspire action among young readers. So we all know literature may be in the written form, but it can be in various other forms to try and create awareness among young readers. So right from the picture books for little children to adult books, there's a variety of literature out there informing children about climate and climate change, about the positive way of living on the earth, of teaching the values of ethical living and thinking. Then there are global perspectives. As I just said, that the voices of the regional areas in India, for example, they are coming up now in the climate literature. So there's a diversification, there's an inclusion of voices from diverse cultures and regions, highlighting global impacts and responses to climate change. Translation and cross-cultural works in increasing translation of eco-literature, promoting cross-cultural understanding of environmental issues is also there. So in regional areas in India, if we are able to find some translated literature, there is a lot of climate literature from Assamese and from Bengali literature, from South India too, and a lot of it has to do with trees, rivers, mountains, and how human beings are connected with them and how climate change has kind of destroyed that relationship. There is an importance given to literary festivals and awards because literary festivals and awards they give writers an opening and they sort of publicize their writings. In this way, the climate writings also get open publicity. So this promotion and recognition through literary festivals and awards focus on climate change and environmental literature encourages writers to address these critical issues. So when we discuss regional literature that is about climate, we learn things that would be different if it was written from somebody in a city or a town, because the different regions of India and the numerous linguistic regions, the numerous cultural regions have something unique about them, have unique traditions and rituals related to climate and nature, and many of them are a very positive contribution towards reducing the damage of climate change, and they ought to be brought forth and they need to be translated and they need to be publicized. A lot of this literature is such that if we talk about Dalit literature, it might be about the oppression of Dalits, but we cannot separate that regional literature from nature that is in the background. So nature also is side by side. The oppression of women and the oppression of nature, they move side by side. The most important book that spearheaded the climate change movement, that started the climate change writing and the climate fiction, that was the book titled Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. This writer was American. She was a scientist by profession, and she also had a talent for creative writing. She was able to write very impressively and beautifully. She observed that DDT was being sprayed in various agricultural areas. Being a scientist, she understood the harmful effects of DDT, and she wrote this book, Silent Spring. Now, in this title, this Silent Spring means that one day all the flowers and the plants of that certain area turned white, and it was a silent spring. Springtime was not of singing birds, it was not of colorful flowers, it was not of lots of sounds. It was a place that was dead and which was all white with no other living organisms. So this was the theme of her book, Silent Spring, and she raised an issue with the corporations that were selling DDT, and the whole network of companies felt threatened by her book, because at that time people did not know about the ill effects of DDT. So like today also, we don't know the ill effects of what the insect killers that we use in our homes, the kind of phenyl, etc., that we use to wash our floors, because they may have long lasting effects on our health also, but on the environment also. So we do not know. So there also DDT at one time was a one fix for a lot of problems. So getting rid of the ants and getting rid of the pests and getting rid of all the cockroaches. But in that way, the environment was being harmed. So when she wrote this, she was opposed by the pharmaceutical companies, and the book was banned for almost 20 years. It was only many years after her death that the book came up again, when there were rising environmental concerns about problems related to DDT that had reached the food chain, and how people suffered from ailments from it. When it was put into the soil, into the crops, it went into the water cycle and or in the food chain, and so she was silenced for quite some time. But her book emerged again, and today it's a kind of Bible for climate literature. It's a seminal work on environmental science and a Bible for the climate change movement. She was a marine biologist and a nature writer, and this book was written in response to the widespread use of synthetic pesticides post World War II, particularly DDT. The structure of the book. It is a fable for tomorrow. Opens with a fictional account of a town devastated by pesticides. Sets the tone by illustrating the potential consequences of chemical pollution. So it was just not DDT, there were other things also. There were other potentially hazardous chemicals also, as they are there in our household use today also. And every time I hear about something in the news or in the ads, this is much more powerful as a mosquito killer, as a cockroach killer. This one is more powerful, this is double in power, this is triple in power. And it just keeps me wondering that if it's going to be so powerful, how much more harmful is it going to be for us as well as for our environment. If we try to think a lot on it, there are times when there are no ants around, there are no cockroaches around. It's like perhaps all these chemicals have destroyed not only these ants and cockroaches, but killed other friendly organisms too that would be protecting us. So it is now late in the day when I read and I try to understand that we may have hated spiders and we may have hated frogs, but animals and creatures like that also have a protective quality about them, because they eat other pests. But we have ignored all those things and we just use one fix for everything. Spray this and you will have absolutely clear frauds, and you will kill everything there. So this is the truth, and this is what was there in that book. The obligation to endure. It discusses the impact of human activity on nature, highlights the persistence of pesticides in the environment. So the continuous use of pesticides, the effect remains for a long time, and there are a lot of organisms that are good for our health, that build up our immunity, but everything gets lost when we have one thing that must destroy everything else. They are also called elixirs of death. She explores the history and the development of chemical pesticides and gives a detail of their toxic effects on various forms of life. So that was what I was stressing on. The various forms of life are affected, and if I can give you a very simple example from the human body. Whenever we have some ailment like a stomach infection or some other infection, we are given a course of antibiotics. Now when we take those antibiotics, they are meant to kill certain germs, but they kill the friendly germs also. So they are good bacteria and bad bacteria. And when the good bacteria killed along with the bad bacteria, that creates disbalance in the system. So if the human body is planned in that way, the ecology is also planned in that way. So even the good is destroyed with the evil. So this is what happens, and the effect lasts for a long time. It takes a long time for the environment to recover from the effects of these pesticides. And the worst thing is that the pesticides are then sprayed again and again. It is not that they are sprayed once, it just happens again and again. And the excuse for this is that the human population has increased so much, so food is needed to feed the human population. So one cannot live without pesticides. So this is the explanation, and I leave it to you to think over this. The major themes of the book are environmental impact of pesticides, how pesticides contaminate air, water and soil. They discuss bioaccumulation and biomagnification, where chemicals build up in organisms and move up the food chain. So these are things that we have just discussed, that the food chain and the water cycle, everything gets affected by chemicals and pesticides being sprayed on one field. It spreads out. Then there are risks to human health also. Pesticide exposure has been linked to serious health problems, including cancer and genetic damage. She has highlighted cases of acute poisoning and long-term health effects. So even in today's environment, where we are told that there is a lot of plastic in our bodies, one wonders what we are living with. The number of chemicals and the pesticides sprayed on the vegetables and the fruits that are sold. Nobody knows the outcome, how it affects the human body. We read about in general, but somehow whatever is read, the warnings are ignored. So it is like we don't know how much harm is being done to us on our bodies through the food that we eat, which is contaminated with chemicals. There are ecological interconnections. There is an interconnected nature of ecosystems, and we have talked about this earlier also. She mentions how the destruction of one species affects the entire food web. So the whole ecosystem is closely connected with each other. Destroying one species harms the whole food web. So key case studies given in the book: bird population decline, focuses on the thinning of bird eggshells due to DDT, leads to the book's title, reflecting the silence of birds in the affected areas. There is the effect on fish and aquatic life. The pesticide runoff in water bodies kills fish and other aquatic organisms, plus it goes into the drinking water of human beings through groundwater wells. So the entire water ecosystem is poisoned because of these pesticides. There are numerous human tragedies about things happening in small villages where villagers are illiterate, and there are deaths caused by water or certain crops, or living in certain area the air is poisoned. So these are all cases of pesticide poisoning in communities. And she gives the example of Clear Lake, California, where pesticides meant to control gnats or mosquitoes killed birds and other wildlife instead. So one can see that pesticides wreak havoc with the entire ecosystem and also adversely affect human life and human health. The book is a critique of the chemical industry and policy, industry practices. The book criticizes the chemical industry for prioritizing profits over human life. It accuses companies of spreading misinformation about the safety of their products. So, if we talk about this today, well, it is so true that things have to be sold, profits have to be made, and so certain detergents, certain chemicals, household cleaners and all, they are sold, and with the jingles and the songs talking about the safety of the products, and in actual they harm the health. So it's the industry and the market that are so valuable, that are more important than human health. Government and regulation. The book critiques government agencies for failing to regulate pesticides adequately. Rachel Carson calls for stricter controls and better research on the long-term effect of chemicals. So this book ought to be brought into the public arena in India too, where all the food and the vegetables that we eat are, sprayed by unknown chemicals and unknown pesticides. And so when we eat them, we don't even know which chemical we are ingesting. So just to give you an example of the fruits and vegetables being injected with pesticides over here, a case came to my observation. Somebody had purchased a certain vegetable, and they placed it in the house, and it was a normal size vegetable. The next day, the vegetable had swelled up in twice, thrice its size. So what was this? This is what it is about pesticides. Being layman, we don't even know what chemicals we are ingesting. And she had written in this book with a futuristic outlook. She was seeing the future of the world and trying to say that government policy was important in trying to monitor what was going into the food that we eat, into the vegetables and the fruit, and that the government should have control over it. These days, there are certain issues in America about genetically modified food and about organic food which is not grown with chemical fertilizers. So as we hear that they have separate places in the market, in their department stores, which say this is organic, and this is not GMO, this is not genetically modified, or this is not chemically free. So in India, I suppose we still have a long way to go to at least reach that point where the public becomes aware and they want to choose what they think is best. So this thing needs to reach us too, in our markets too, that the consumer should be given a choice about what they want to eat, and they must be able to take care of their health. alternative solutions given in the book. Biological control. She is against the use of chemical pesticides to kill pests. She advocates the use of natural predators and parasites to control pest populations. She emphasizes the success of integrated pest management practices. So, according to her, there are various other natural solutions for pest control, and it's not necessary to clog the soil or the ecosystem with pesticides. She talks about organic farming also. She believes in organic farming, which does not rely on synthetic chemicals. So, we will stop here and we will continue in the next lesson. Thank you for attending this lesson.